Clara Hayes had always believed that a person could change their entire life with a single decision, but she never imagined hers would begin with a letter written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. The envelope had arrived on a gray, windswept morning, slipped beneath her door like a message carried by fate. She held it for a long moment before opening it, almost afraid that whatever waited inside would alter the quiet, predictable world she'd lived in for years. Her life in St. Louis had become a series of endings. Her parents gone, her job at the dressmaker's shop reduced, her landlord threatening eviction. Each night, she lay awake listening to the city carriages roll by and wondered how long she could continue. When she first saw the mail-order bride advertisement pinned outside the general store, she'd walked away, but her eyes had been drawn back to it again and again, like the tug of something she couldn't name. And then the first letter arrived. The man behind it, Elias Carter, wrote with a careful sincerity that surprised her. He didn't promise riches or a life of glamour, only honesty, hard work, and a quiet home on a small ranch nestled near a frontier town at the base of the mountains. He didn't hide his loneliness, nor did he hide the fact that he'd been alone too long. "I don't expect more than what's fair," he'd written, "but I'd be grateful for a partner in life, someone kind, someone willing to build something together." Clara reread his words again and again, tracing the strokes of his pen with her fingertips. She could almost feel the warmth of the man behind them, someone who didn't embellish, didn't charm for the sake of charm, someone who wrote from the heart. It hadn't taken long for their letters to grow deeper. She told him about her love of reading, about knitting to keep her hands busy when her mind wouldn't quiet. She confessed her fear of ending up alone in a world too big for her. Elias answered with stories of his late parents, of long winters that made him understand what silence really meant, of a house that felt too large for one man. And then one day, his letter ended differently. "If you are willing, I would welcome you as my wife. I don't write this lightly. You deserve someone who sees you, Clara, and I hope I can be that man." Clara had folded the letter against her chest, her heartbeat drumming through the thin paper. She said yes. Leaving St. Louis was both terrifying and freeing. She boarded the stagecoach with one battered trunk, a small purse of coins, and Elias's last letter tucked safely under her cloak. It had been written weeks ago, before the early winter storms began sweeping across the mountains. She studied his handwriting until she knew every curve by heart. The journey was long and bone-chilling. Clara spent most nights huddled alone on benches in drafty rest stops while the wind roared outside like a warning. But she kept imagining the moment she would meet him, the man who had written her not with desperation, but with quiet hope. The moment she arrived in Willow Creek, however, that hope began to tremble. The townsfolk looked at her with something between pity and worry. Their eyes followed her as she stepped down from the stagecoach, boots crunching on frozen earth. Conversations hushed. A woman clutching a basket murmured, "Oh dear, she's Elias's bride." Clara's pulse quickened. She asked for directions to Elias Carter's ranch, but every person she approached hesitated, exchanged glances, or told her the doctor needed to speak with her first. Fear slid cold into her bones. Something was wrong. Her new life, her new husband might not be waiting for her the way she had imagined, and that was how Clara Hayes' story truly began. Not with a warm welcome or a kiss from her groom, but with the chilling whisper that she may have arrived too late. The cold hadn't bothered Clara much during the journey, but now, standing in the center of Willow Creek with the winter wind clawing at her coat, she felt its bite like a threat. The town was small, just a line of wooden storefronts, a blacksmith, a saloon with its doors swinging in the breeze, and a church steeple rising above the roofs like a silent watcher. Smoke curled from chimneys, but the warmth didn't reach the people's eyes. Something was wrong. Everyone could see it, everyone except her. When she stepped off the stagecoach, The first person to approach was an older woman carrying a basket of laundry. Her expression softened when she saw Clara's hopeful face, but the softness quickly slipped into sorrow. "You must be Miss Hayes," the woman said quietly. "Elias's bride." The word bride landed between them like a stone. Clara swallowed. "Yes, I am here to meet him." The woman's lips trembled just slightly. "You poor thing, poor thing?" Clara's grip tightened on her suitcase. Before she could ask anything more, the woman murmured something sympathetic, squeezed Clara's arm, and hurried away down the boardwalk, her skirt swaying as she disappeared into a narrow alley. Clara turned to the next person, a shopkeeper sweeping his porch. "Sir, I'm looking for Elias Carter." The broom paused in midair. The shopkeeper's expression shuddered, like she had mentioned a ghost. "Best talk to the doctor, miss. He's the one who's been keeping track of the Carter place." "Track of? Why would the doctor need to keep track of her groom?" Clara's heart began to pound as she walked toward the building marked Dr. Willow, physician and surgeon. Whispers followed her like drifting snow. She came too late. Poor girl. Storm took everything up there. Man hasn't been seen in days. Clara tried to shake off the dread curling inside her, but each whispered phrase dug deeper. Every step felt heavier. By the time she reached the doctor's office, her breath had turned shallow, her fingers numb from fear more than cold. She knocked. The door opened to reveal a tall, graying man in a worn vest and spectacles perched on his nose. His expression was stern, but softened with a heaviness that made Clara's stomach twist. "You must be Miss Hayes," he said, almost gently. She nodded. "Please, sir, where is Elias? No one will speak plain to me." The doctor pressed his lips together, then stepped aside. "Come in. You should sit." Clara didn't want to sit. She wanted answers, but she stepped inside the dimly lit room where jars, books, and the scent of medicinal herbs filled the air. A fire crackled in the corner stove. Offering warmth, she barely noticed that Dr. Willow leaned against his desk, folding his arms as though bracing himself. "There was a storm," he began, 4 days ago. "One of the worst this early in winter." Clara's nails dug into the fabric of her gloves. "Elias went up into the mountains to check on some cattle. He didn't return." The doctor sighed. "I sent a search party, but the snow came down too fast. Visibility dropped to nothing. No one could go further." Silence stretched heavy between them. Clara's voice cracked. "You think he's dead?" The doctor looked away. "He might be alive. Elias is strong, tough, but injured? Stranded?" His gaze met hers. "He hasn't had food, supplies, or warmth for days. The chances are not good." Clara felt the world tilt. She gripped the arm of the chair to steady herself. "He wrote me just 3 weeks ago," she whispered. "He was excited, hopeful." Her throat tightened. "I can't just stand here and do nothing." The doctor placed a hand on her shoulder. "Miss Hayes, the mountains are dangerous right now." It would be reckless to, but Clara rose so suddenly he stepped back. "Tell me where his cabin is." His brows knitted. "Miss Hayes, please," she begged, voice breaking but iron beneath the tears. "If he's out there, if he's alive, I have to go. I didn't come all this way to bury a man I never even met." The doctor hesitated. For a heartbeat, Clara feared he would refuse. Then, slowly, he reached for a map dot, and Clara Hayes realized she would risk anything, even her own life, to find the man who had written her letters filled with hope. The man who might be lying alone in the frozen wilderness, waiting for someone to save him, someone like her. Clara had never ridden through mountains before. She had never faced a storm or icy trails steep enough to steal a person's breath. But as she guided the doctor's borrowed horse along the narrow path, she felt a strange clarity settle over her, like fear had burned itself out and left only determination behind. The wind cut across her face, sharp as a blade, snowflakes. clung to her eyelashes, turning the world into a swirling blur of white and gray. The trees, tall and skeletal, groaned under layers of ice. The horse moved carefully, hooves sinking into deep drifts. Still, Clara pushed forward. She had to find Elias. Every letter he'd written flashed behind her eyes, the slow, deliberate handwriting, the sincerity in every line, the quiet yearning between words. She remembered what he'd said in the first one. It gets lonely up here, sometimes too quiet. But maybe the right person could fill the silence. She refused to let that silence swallow him. The trail grew steeper. Snow was falling harder now, heavy flakes that stung her skin. Twice, the horse slipped, and Clara scrambled to steady herself. Her fingers were numb, her jaw trembling, but the map the doctor had drawn stayed clenched inside her coat, her lifeline. Hours passed. Or maybe it was only one time dissolved in the storm's white fury. Then, through the trees, she saw it. A cabin, half buried in snow, smokeless chimney. Dark windows. Silent. A wave of dread nearly buckled her knees. "Elias?" she whispered, breath trembling. She dismounted clumsily, boots sinking thigh-deep in drifts. Fighting through the freezing wind, she stumbled toward the cabin, heart pounding in her ears. Each step felt heavier than the last. At the door, she grabbed the handle frozen solid and shoved. Her shoulder against the wood. It didn't move. She hit it again and again. Finally, on the fourth desperate shove, the door cracked open with a splintering groan. A burst of icy air sweeping inside. The cabin was dark. Still. Cold. Her pulse hammered as she stepped in, snow trailing behind her. She blinked hard, letting her eyes adjust. Shadows filled the corners. The fireplace was dead, stones blackened but cold to the touch. A chair lay tipped over. A blanket lay crumpled on the floor. Then she saw him. Elias. He was collapsed near the bed, half covered by a fallen quilt. His skin was pale, his lips bluish, his hair matted with sweat and frost. One arm was bent unnaturally, the sleeve torn and dark with old blood. His chest rose shallowly, so shallow she thought she imagined it. Clara dropped to her knees so fast the impact sent pain shooting up her legs. "Elias," she whispered, hands trembling as she cupped his cheeks. His skin was ice cold. Too cold. Oh, God. "Please." His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A faint sound escaped his throat, a weak, broken exhale. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. He was alive. Barely. She moved quickly, fear sharpening her senses. She dragged wood to the fireplace, fingers shaking so hard she struggled with the matches. Twice they slipped. The third flared, and she lit the tinder. Slowly, warmth trickled into the room. She hauled Elias closer to the fire, using all her strength. His body was heavy, limp, but she refused to stop. She worked with frantic purpose, pulling blankets over him, pressing her own coat around his shoulders, rubbing his arms to stir heat into stiff limbs. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, Elias." "Stay." His lashes flickered. A faint groan escaped him, pained and hoarse. Clara leaned over him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "I'm Clara," she breathed, tears falling onto his skin. "Your bride." "I'm here." "You're not alone anymore." She didn't know if he heard, but she kept saying it anyway. As the fire grew, casting fragile warmth into the frozen cabin. Clara Hayes understood something with startling clarity. She might have come here as a stranger, a woman answering an advertisement. But she was not leaving this cabin without Elias Carter, alive, whatever it took, whoever she had to become. The fire crackled softly, its warmth brushing Clara's chilled skin. But her focus never left Elias. He lay still, pale and fragile, as if the snowstorm itself had stolen every ounce of life from him. Every shallow breath, Every shiver that racked his body made her heart hammer. This was no longer a meeting of strangers. This was survival, and she was the only person standing between him and the freezing darkness. She had never been a nurse. She had never faced life-or-death situations alone. But she knew instinctively that she couldn't hesitate. She had to act. Clara stripped off her scarf and dampened it in water she had heated over the fire. Carefully, she pressed it against his forehead to reduce the fever that burned beneath his skin. His shallow groans made her flinch, but she refused to stop. Each moment she faltered, the thought of losing him sent a cold terror through her. "Stay with me," she whispered, brushing damp hair from his face. Her fingers were trembling, but her voice was steady, almost commanding in its insistence. "I didn't come all this way to leave you here alone. Not now. Not ever." She lifted him gently, supporting his weight as she moved him closer to the warmth of the fire. He was heavier than she expected, every muscle rigid and trembling. But she wouldn't let the ache in her arms distract her. She had to focus on keeping him alive. Clara worked quickly, wrapping him in blankets she had salvaged from the cabin, pressing them tight around his shivering body. She gave him small sips of water, coaxing him to swallow despite the heat in his throat, the exhaustion in his limbs. Every time his eyelids flickered, she leaned closer, murmuring his name, willing him to recognize her voice. Hours blurred together. She fed him broth, rubbed warmth into his frozen hands, whispered words of comfort that she prayed reached him. Occasionally, she paused to catch her own breath, her body screaming in exhaustion, but she never left him. Never for a second. And then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, Elias's eyes fluttered open. Pale blue met hers, wide with confusion and disbelief. His lips parted, rasping a broken sound that could have been a word or a gasp of wonder. "You?" he murmured, voice hoarse, almost lost in the firelight. "Who?" Clara pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the faint beat of his heart beneath her palm. "It's me, Clara. Your bride. I'm here, Elias. I found you. You're safe now." His gaze locked onto hers, and something unspoken passed between them. Shock, gratitude, awe, and the first fragile spark of trust. He tried to sit up, but she gently pushed him back. "No," she said firmly, yet softly. "Don't move. You've been through enough. Let me take care of you. You're going to be okay." He blinked, struggling to focus, to understand how this woman, this stranger, had crossed mountains, braved snow, and risked everything to save him. Every fiber of his being wanted to speak, to question, to resist, but all that rose from his lips was a raw, quiet sound of awe. Clara stayed beside him through the night. She whispered stories to keep him awake, sang soft songs she had learned as a child, and rubbed warmth back into his frozen limbs. Every motion, every word, every gentle touch was a lifeline, not just to his body, but to his heart. By morning, Elias's fever had subsided slightly. He could sit, leaning against the firelight, and look at her with a clarity that hadn't been there before. He saw her not as a stranger, not as a bride sent by letters, but as the only reason he was alive. Clara, exhausted yet unwavering, smiled softly at him. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered, "and you're going to live. I won't let you die here. Not while I'm standing." And in that quiet, snowbound cabin, Elias realized something that would change the rest of their lives. This woman, this brave, determined, fearless woman was no ordinary bride. She was his lifeline, his salvation. And somehow, already, she had begun to claim a place in his heart that no one else could ever touch. Elias. Carter had always believed he was self-sufficient. Life on the frontier demanded it. From a young age, he learned to hunt, mend fences, and weather storms without complaint. Pride was his armor, solitude his companion. But lying in that small, snowbound cabin, fevered and broken, He faced something he had never encountered before: dependence. He tried to speak, to protest, to insist that Clara leave and let him fend for himself. His voice came out hoarse, weak, almost pitiful. I'm fine." "You shouldn't have." Clara's hand pressed firmly against his chest, stopping him mid-sentence. "Don't talk like that. You're not fine. And I'm not leaving. Not until you can stand on your own 2 feet again. You need me, and I'm here. That's the way it is." The words hit him harder than the storm outside. He wanted to reject them, to retreat into the walls of pride and isolation that had always kept him safe. Yet, in the steady gaze of this woman who had crossed mountains, braved the snow, and saved his life with nothing but determination and care, he realized how deeply wrong he had been. She wasn't leaving, and for the first time, he didn't want her to. The night had stretched on endlessly, and Clara's tireless presence had worn away his resistance. Her touch, gentle but purposeful, coaxed warmth into his frozen limbs. Her voice, soft yet commanding, grounded him in reality even as the fever ebbed and flowed. Every action she took was an unspoken promise. She would fight for him, endure anything, stay awake through every struggle. Elias's chest rose and fell more steadily now. He could sit upright, leaning against the wall, but the simple act of moving sent sharp jolts of pain through him. He clenched his fists, trying to summon his old self, the strong, stoic man who had survived countless winters alone, but Clara's presence made him question the value of that solitude. She noticed him tensing, and without a word, guided his hands to rest on her shoulders. Her touch was firm yet soothing. "You don't have to fight alone," she said. "You don't have to be the man who bears everything by himself. Let me in. Let me help. That's what I came here for." The honesty in her words, the courage it took to say them, pierced the armor he had spent a lifetime building. Pride clashed with gratitude, stubbornness with awe. He had survived many storms, but this woman who had risked everything to reach him was unlike anything he had ever faced. She wasn't asking for permission or testing him. She was simply giving herself entirely. Elias realized he had a choice: cling to isolation and lose the fragile thread of connection that Clara offered, or surrender, for the first time, to the bond forming between them. And as he looked into her determined, tear-streaked face, he understood that surrendering didn't mean weakness. It meant trust. It meant life, Clara. He murmured, voice hoarse, eyes flickering with emotion he could barely name. I don't know what to say." She shook her head gently. "You don't have to say anything. Just stay with me. Live with me. Let me do this for you, for us." A shiver ran through him, not from the cold, but from the sudden realization that he had never wanted anything more than this: someone to stand by him, unflinching, who refused to leave even when the world tried to claim him. His heart, long hardened by loneliness and self-reliance, began to crack. And inside that crack, warmth seeped in, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to wane. In the quiet of the cabin, Elias and Clara sat together, the fire flickering across their faces. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit the truth he had denied for so long. He couldn't fight this battle alone, and he didn't want to. Not now, not ever. And in that acceptance, the first seeds of love took root, tender, fragile, yet unyielding. He was no longer just a man fighting to survive. He was a man beginning to fight for something far greater: a life with Clara, the woman who had crossed mountains, battled snow, and become his lifeline in a world that had taught him to be alone. The first rays of dawn filtered through the frost-lined cabin windows, dusting the room in pale gold. The storm had passed, leaving silence in its wake, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Clara, exhausted but vigilant, hadn't slept. She had sat beside Elias all night, monitoring every shallow breath, adjusting blankets, and coaxing him to drink water between whispered reassurances. Then, gradually, the impossible happened. Elias's eyelids twitched, flickering open like fragile shutters against the morning light. His blue eyes, clouded and fevered just hours ago, now stared at her in wide-eyed confusion. For a moment he didn't speak, didn't move, he only looked. And Clara, kneeling beside him, held her breath. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. She brushed damp hair from his forehead and smiled softly, the corners of her lips breaking her exhaustion. "I was so worried. I thought I might lose you." He blinked, trying to focus on her face, to make sense of the warm, living presence beside him. "Who?" His voice was hoarse, weak, but it carried a thread of wonder. Clara pressed a hand gently to his chest. "It's me, Clara, your bride. I'm here. I found you, Elias. You're safe now." Recognition or perhaps disbelief passed over his features. He tried to push himself up, instinctively reaching for his independence, but his body betrayed him. Weakness rooted him to the blankets. Pain flared in his arms and chest. He groaned, swallowing back frustration and embarrassment. "Don't move," Clara said firmly, yet with gentleness. She guided his trembling hands to rest against hers. "You've been through too much. Let me take care of you. That's my job now." Her calm certainty soothed something deep inside him, something he had long buried beneath years of pride and solitude. He wanted to resist, to insist that he was fine, that he could manage, but the exhaustion, the cold, the hours of helplessness, and the sheer force of her determination made him see the truth. He needed her. Clara offered him water and small sips of the broth she had prepared. Each swallow, each tentative movement, made him realize how much he had depended on her care, how much she had risked to reach him. And the truth hit him like a fire in his chest. She was not just a stranger who had answered a letter. She was the woman who had saved his life, who had crossed mountains and braved snowstorms without hesitation, solely to be by his side. "You came all this way for me?" He rasped, eyes glistening with an emotion he couldn't name. "Why?" Clara shook her head, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "Because I promised myself I wouldn't let anything happen to you, not when I've come so far. Not when I've already written to you, dreamed of you, and believed in you." Her voice faltered, but only for a heartbeat. Then it strengthened. "You deserve to live, Elias, and I'm not leaving until you're safe." Something inside him, a wall he had built around his heart, piece by piece, over a lifetime of solitude, began to crumble. He reached, weakly, for her hand, letting her warmth anchor him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to hide his vulnerability. I don't know what to say," he whispered, voice hoarse. "No woman, no one, has ever—" His words faltered, broken by awe and gratitude. "You don't need to say anything," Clara replied softly. "Just stay with me. Breathe. Live. That's enough." The firelight danced across their faces, casting long shadows against the walls of the cabin. Outside, the mountains gleamed white under the morning sun, untouched and pristine. Inside, something far warmer bloomed, a fragile, tender trust, and the beginning of a bond that neither storm nor snow could break. Elias blinked again, taking her hand more firmly. His heart, once guarded and stoic, now beat with a mixture of relief, wonder, and an unfamiliar hope. He was alive. And somehow, in the warmth of that cabin and the steady courage of the woman before him, he felt for the first time that life was worth more than survival. It was worth living together. In that quiet moment, as snow still clung to the roof outside and the fire flickered between them, Elias realized something he would never forget. Clara Hayes was no ordinary woman. She was the one who had breathed life back into him, and he would not let her go. The storm had finally passed, but its aftermath lingered like a shadow over the mountains. Outside, the world glistened under a pale sun, snow blanketing the rugged landscape in a deceptive calm. Inside the cabin, however, warmth had begun to return, not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from the slow, steady recovery of Elias Carter and the unwavering presence of Clara Hayes. The first few hours after his awakening had been delicate. Elias, though alert, was still weak, his muscles stiff from days of immobilization, his mind clouded with fever and exhaustion. Clara moved carefully around him, tending to his wounds, coaxing him to eat, and encouraging him to drink water. Every motion, every word, was infused with a mixture of urgency and tenderness. "You're improving," she said softly, brushing snow-damp hair from his forehead. Her hands lingered, warm against his chilled skin. "You can sit up for a few minutes if you like." Elias tried, groaning at the effort, but she steadied him with gentle hands. "Easy," she whispered. "No sudden movements. You're not alone anymore. You have me." The words seemed simple, but to Elias, they carried a weight heavier than any rifle or storm he had faced. His life had been one of solitude, where pride and self-reliance were his only allies. And now, here was this woman, this mail-order bride he had never expected, standing unwavering, guiding him and insisting that he accept help. He wanted to resist, to push her away and assert the independence that had defined him for decades. Yet every time he tried, her presence anchored him. She had crossed mountains, fought through snowstorms, and cared for him without question. She had saved his life, and slowly, painfully, he realized that he didn't want to push her away. Hours turned into the afternoon, and the small cabin felt less like a refuge from the storm and more like a sanctuary. Clara moved with quiet efficiency, stacking firewood, mending a torn blanket, and preparing a light meal. Elias watched her, noting the determination in her movements, the care in her touch, and the unwavering focus in her eyes. It was in these moments, quiet, simple, and profoundly human, that he began to understand the depth of her courage. "You're remarkable," he murmured, his voice still weak, yet filled with genuine awe. I've never met anyone like you." Clara smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I'm just doing what anyone would do if they cared about someone," she replied, though her eyes betrayed a mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I couldn't leave you out there. I couldn't." The words resonated deeply within him. For the first time, Elias felt the fragile beginnings of trust, not the kind that relied on letters or promises, but the kind that is forged in shared struggle, in vulnerability, and in the quiet conviction that someone will stay, no matter what. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting the cabin in a soft golden glow, Elias reached for her hand. His grip was tentative at first, a test of boundaries, yet Clara did not pull away. Instead, she held his hand gently, reassuringly, grounding him. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "You risked everything. For a man you've never even met before." "You don't need to repay me," she whispered. "You just need to live. That's enough." And in that moment, Elias realized that her courage and devotion were not just acts of heroism, they were the foundation of a bond that could weather anything. He was no longer alone. He had someone who believed in him, who cared for him, and who refused to abandon him. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within him, the fear, the pride, the loneliness was beginning to calm. And for the first time in years, Elias Carter allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not just surviving, but living. With Clara by his side, the days that followed were a slow rhythm of recovery, care, and quiet companionship. The mountains were still white, The cold lingering outside, but inside the cabin, warmth began to return, not just from the fire, but from the bond forming between Clara and Elias. Each day, Clara's courage became more than an act of survival. It became the anchor that kept him grounded, the steady hand guiding him back to life. Elias awoke each morning to the soft sounds of Clara preparing breakfast, the faint crackle of firewood settling, and the careful movements of a woman who had made his survival her purpose. She moved around him with an ease that belied the urgency he knew she felt, but he could see it in the intensity of her gaze when she looked at him, in the way her hands lingered over his blankets, or rested briefly on his shoulders as she adjusted his posture. "You're looking stronger today," she said one morning, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. "We'll have you walking to the edge of the property soon, I promise." Elias attempted a smile, though it faltered under the weight of his lingering weakness. He tried to speak, to assert some pride, but the words caught in his throat. His life had always been about doing, surviving, and enduring alone, but Clara's presence challenged everything he thought he knew about strength. Strength, he realized, wasn't just enduring hardship, was allowing someone else to fight with you, to fight for you. The firelight glimmered in the cabin, casting shadows that danced across the rough wooden walls. Clara knelt beside him as she tended to the smallest of his injuries, cleaning a scab on his arm with careful precision. Her touch was deliberate, yet gentle, almost reverent. Each movement reassured him, reminding him that he was alive because she had refused to let him perish in the storm. "You've been through so much," she murmured, her voice soft yet unwavering. "But you're still here, and you're going to be okay. I won't let anything happen to you again, Elias, not ever." The sincerity in her eyes struck him harder than any bullet or blade ever could. He wanted to resist, to reclaim his independence, but her words, her determination, and her unwavering presence made resistance impossible. Her courage wasn't just inspiring, it was a lifeline. He took a shaky breath and reached for her hand, holding it in his own. I don't know how to thank you," he admitted, his voice low and rough. No one has ever done this for me." "You don't need to thank me," Clara said gently. "You just need to live. That's all the thanks I need." Elias felt a lump rise in his throat. He realized then that his survival wasn't just about his own body. It was about the trust and connection he had begun to feel with Clara. Her courage had shown him a life beyond solitude. Beyond the walls he had built around his heart. As the days passed, he regained strength slowly but surely. His steps became steadier, his breathing easier, and his hands stronger. Each time he attempted something new, standing, walking, tending to a small fire, Clara was there, encouraging, supporting, guiding. Each small success cemented his growing admiration and gratitude for the woman who had risked everything to reach him. One evening, as the sun set behind the snow-covered peaks, Elias watched her as she stacked firewood. The glow of the fire danced across her face, highlighting her determination and resilience. For the first time, he let himself imagine a life beyond mere survival, a life with her, side by side, bound not by letters, but by the trust and courage that had carried him through the storm. He realized then that he could survive many winters alone, endure many hardships, but he no longer wanted to. Clara had become his anchor, his hope, and the first true presence of warmth he had felt in years. And in that realization, Elias Carter felt a stirring in his heart he had never known before, gratitude that ran deeper than life itself, and the first glimmer of love born from snow, struggle, and unwavering courage. The cabin was quiet that evening, the storm long gone, leaving the mountains sparkling in the pale light of a winter sunset. The world outside was serene and unyielding, but inside, something far warmer and more fragile was taking shape. Elias Carter, once a man defined by solitude and pride, now sat close to the fire, watching Clara as she tended to the small tasks around the cabin. Every movement she made, every careful adjustment of blankets or stoking of the fire, was a reminder of what she had endured for him, and what she continued to give without hesitation. He could no longer deny the truth he had been avoiding for so long. The bond between them had grown in the crucible of snow, fear, and vulnerability. He had seen her courage, her patience, her unwavering devotion, and it had softened the edges of his heart. Hardened over years of survival and loneliness, Clara finally settled beside him, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Her eyes, reflecting the warm firelight, met his with quiet strength. "You've come a long way, Elias," she said softly. "Physically and emotionally, you're stronger than you realize." He reached for her hand, tentative at first, then with more certainty. The touch was electric, grounding him, reminding him of the nights she had stayed awake, whispering encouragement and watching over him as he struggled to survive. "Clara," he murmured, his voice rough, husky from emotion. You saved me. I don't even know where to begin to thank you." She shook her head gently, squeezing his hand. "You don't need to thank me. You just needed someone to fight with you. That's all. And I always will." The simplicity of her words struck him, but the weight behind them was undeniable. For the first time in his life, Elias felt that vulnerability didn't mean weakness. It meant connection, trust, and above all, love. He looked at her, at the woman who had crossed mountains, braved storms, and nursed him back from the brink, and he realized he couldn't imagine a life without her presence, without her courage anchoring him. A sudden clarity washed over him. He had survived many hardships alone, endured countless winters, but he had never faced a trial like this one that demanded both humility and trust, one that revealed the truth about his heart. And now he knew he wanted more than survival. He wanted her. Always her. "Clara," he said, his voice low but filled with intensity. "I don't care what storms come, what winters rage, or what obstacles lie ahead. I swear to you, I will never let you go. Not now, not ever. You've risked everything for me, and I—" His voice broke, choked with emotion. "I can't imagine my life without you by my side." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she smiled through them, a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet triumph. "Elias, I didn't come all this way to fight alone. I came to stand by your side, through everything. And I won't leave, not for a second." He drew her closer, careful to be gentle, yet with a force born of conviction. "Then let me keep you safe. Let me prove that you'll never regret coming here, that I will always fight for you, just as you fought for me." The firelight danced across their faces, casting the room in warm amber hues. Outside, the snow reflected the fading sun, the mountains calm and eternal. But inside, something new had been forged in the quiet, unyielding hours of their shared struggle. A vow, a promise, a love born of courage, survival, and unwavering devotion. Clara leaned against him, letting the warmth of his body seep into her, and Elias held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart. They had endured the storm. They had faced death, fear, and the unknown. And in the aftermath, they had found each other not as strangers bound by letters, but as partners bound by trust, courage, and a love neither could ever relinquish. In the firelight, with the mountain's silent witness outside, Elias Carter's heart finally opened entirely, and he knew one truth with absolute certainty. Clara Hayes was no ordinary woman. She was his anchor, his salvation, and the love he would never let go of for the rest of his life. The sun rose over the snow-blanketed mountains, spilling warm gold across the rugged landscape. The storm had passed completely, leaving the world crisp, clear, and untouched, as if the wilderness itself had paused to witness what had unfolded in the little cabin nestled among the trees. Inside, the cabin was quiet except for the crackling fire and the soft murmur of voices that spoke of survival, trust, and something far stronger than either had anticipated. Elias Carter rose slowly, each movement careful but deliberate. He was stronger now, the fever long gone, his body regaining the power that the storm and snow had stolen from him. But the strength he felt was not merely physical. It was the kind that came from having someone beside him who had fought for him with unrelenting courage. Clara Hayes sat nearby, arranging blankets and tending the fire, her cheeks flushed with warmth and exertion. She looked up as he moved, her eyes lighting with that familiar mix of concern and pride. "You're steady enough to walk outside," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet confidence she had nurtured in him over these past days. "But take it slow." He offered a small, grateful smile, stepping carefully toward the door. The air outside was cold, bracing, yet it carried the scent of pine and freshly fallen snow, a stark contrast to the stifling fear of the past days. Elias extended his hand to Clara, and she took it without hesitation, her warmth grounding him. As they stepped together into the brilliance of morning, the mountains stretched endlessly before them, vast and beautiful, but Elias's gaze remained fixed on her. He had survived many storms, endured countless hardships alone, but never had he faced a challenge like this, one that had stripped him of his pride and left him utterly dependent on another. Yet in that dependence he had found trust, and in that trust he had discovered love. Clara walked beside him, steady and patient, offering encouragement with every step. "There's still a long way to go before the ranch is fully secure," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But we'll manage, together." Elias stopped for a moment, turning to face her fully. The sunlight caught her hair, gilding it with warmth, and his heart surged with something he had long buried: hope, gratitude, and an unshakable love. "Clara," he said, voice low but firm, "you didn't just save my life. You've given me everything I didn't even know I needed. I swear, from this day forward, I'll never let you go. Not through storms, not through hardships, not through anything life throws at us." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled, her hand pressing into his. "And I'll never leave you, Elias. I came here for you, to stand by your side. And I always will." They moved slowly across the snow, hands intertwined, their breaths forming clouds in the crisp mountain air. The world around them seemed vast, lonely, and indifferent, but in each other's presence they had created a sanctuary stronger than any cabin or fire. Here, in the heart of the wilderness, they had discovered the extraordinary power of courage, devotion, and love born in extremity. When they reached the edge of the property, Elias paused, looking over the snow-covered ranch. It was rugged, wild, and demanding like life itself, but it no longer seemed threatening. With Clara by his side, every challenge felt surmountable, every hardship bearable. He took her face gently in his hands, eyes locking with hers, and leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "Let's start our life," he whispered, voice rich with emotion. "No letters, no storms, no distance, just you and me together." Clara smiled, her tears now of pure joy. "Together," she echoed, and in that golden morning light, with snow sparkling around them and the mountains standing as silent witnesses, Elias Carter and Clara Hayes took their first true steps into a new life. No longer strangers, no longer bound by chance or letters. They were partners forged in adversity, bound by courage, and united by a love that would endure far beyond the fiercest storm. The world was wide and wild, but for the first time, both of them felt entirely at home.